The animal shelter was never quiet, but there was one room that held a different kind of silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that pressed down on your ears and your heart. This was the room where Dr. Aries Thorne did the hardest. Part of her work. She was a woman who had seen too much to be called optimistic, but not so much that she had lost her softness. It showed in the gentle way she handled the old sick cats, and in the tired patience in her eyes. Today, the weight in the room felt heavier than usual. On the stainless steel table lay a small mud-brown puppy. He was maybe 8 months old, a mix of who knows what breeds, all scruffy fur and 2 big paws. He'd been brought in a week ago, found shivering and alone in a dirty drainage ditch. During a cold rain, he had no microchip. No one had called looking for him, and he'd been listed simply as brown male number 42. The week had been a battle. The puppy was sick, very sick. He had a deep, rattling cough that shook his whole small body, and a fever that wouldn't break. But worse were the strange symptoms. His head would tilt to one side at a worrying angle, and sometimes he'd stumble in circles, as if the world was spinning only for him. He was listless, his eyes often half closed, not with sleep, but with a dull kind of misery. Aries had tried everything she could with the shelter's limited resources. Antibiotics, fluids, careful nursing. But the puppy, number 42, wasn't getting better. If anything, he seemed to be fading. The shelter was overflowing, with healthy animals needing space and a chance. The manager had made the difficult, practical decision. The kind of decision that keeps a place running, but chips away at the people who work there. The puppy's suffering, they said, couldn't be allowed to continue. The appointment was on the schedule. Euthanasia. Brown male #42 double quotes now, in that quiet room. The moment had come. Aries prepared the injection, her movements slow and precise. Her assistant, a young man with a kind face who hated this part of the job, had already given the puppy a mild sedative to calm him. The puppy lay on a soft towel, his breathing labored, his strange tilted head resting on the fabric. He didn't struggle. He just looked at Aries with eyes that were cloudy and confused. "It's okay, little one," Aries whispered, her voice barely breaking the silence. "It's okay. No more being scared. No more being lost." She was talking to comfort herself, as much as the animal. She reached out to stroke the side of his neck, to find a good vein, to offer one last touch of kindness before the end. Her fingers slid through the thick matted fur of his scruff. It was dirty and tangled from his time on the streets. And then her fingertips brushed against something flat and firm. Something that wasn't skin. She paused, frowning. Parting the fur carefully, she saw it. A simple brown leather collar, almost the exact same color as his coat, soaked and filthy and pulled so tight it was nearly invisible. Her heart gave a sudden, hard thump. "Wait," she said, the word sharp in the quiet room. Her assistant froze. With both hands now, Aries gently worked her fingers under the collar. It was snug, but not cruelly so. She found the buckle and carefully, so carefully, undid it. The puppy gave a small sigh, as if relieved by the small pressure being gone. Attached to the ring was a tag. Not a shiny store-bought one, but a small, rectangular piece of brushed stainless steel. It was scratched and worn. She pulled the table light closer and wiped the tag clean with her thumb. The engraving was simple, in plain block letters. It didn't have a phone number. It didn't have an address. Instead, it carried a message. A plea. Aries read it once, then again, her breath catching in her throat. The words were, "My name is Bao. If I'm alone, please contact my brother, Marine. SGT, James Miller. He'll come. Semper Fi." Aries stared. The heavy silence in the room shattered, replaced by a rushing in her ears. This wasn't just a lost dog. This was someone's dog. This was a promise on a metal tag. Semper Fi. Always. Faithful. The motto of the Marines. A brother. Someone who had asked, in this small, permanent way, for their dog to be protected. Cancel it, she said, her voice suddenly strong and clear. She looked at her assistant, whose eyes were wide. Cancel the procedure, right now. Get him back on. The 4, the antibiotics, everything. Do we have that stronger medicine for the inner ear? Start it. Now. The assistant jumped into action, a new energy in the room. The sadness was gone, burned away by a spark of urgent hope. As he carefully lifted the puppy Bio, his name was Ba, from the table, Aris clutched the cold metal tag in her palm. She felt the sharp edges of it pressing into her skin. This changed everything. A mysterious puppy with no hope had, in an instant, become Bio. And Bio had a brother who was a Marine, a brother who had promised he would come. Her job was no longer about ending suffering. It was about starting a search. She had no phone number, no email, just a name and a branch of the military. But she had a clue. And for a veterinarian who spent her life fixing broken creatures, finding a missing person to mend a broken promise felt like a fight worth picking. She walked out of that quiet room, the tag still in her hand, already thinking of who to call. First, the race was on, and for the first time in a week, Bio had someone running for him. The spark of hope from finding the tag was bright, but it didn't last long. It was quickly replaced by a cold, hard worry. Bio was still very sick. Saving him from the needle was just the first step. Now Aris had 2 huge problems sitting in front of her. The first was keeping Bio alive, long enough for anyone to find his brother. The second was actually finding that brother, a man whose only address was Marine. Back in the isolation kennel, Bio lay on a clean blanket, shivering. The rattling in his chest was terrible to hear. Aris knelt beside him, the metal tag now on her own keychain for safekeeping. She placed a hand gently on his side, feeling the frantic, uneven heartbeat under his ribs. We have a name now, buddy. You're Bio, she whispered. And we're going to fight for you, okay? Both of us. But fighting meant money. The shelter operated on a shoestring budget. The medicines he'd already taken, the 4 fluids, the tests, it all cost more than they had for one animal. Aris knew the manager would be asking hard questions by tomorrow. She couldn't just run up a bill for a dog that might, in the end, not make it. The thought made her feel sick. She decided to split the work. She would focus on Beau's body. Someone else needed to start the search for his family. She found her assistant, the young man from the procedure room, sorting donations in the back. I need a favor, she said, her voice low and serious. A big one. I need you to be a detective. She showed him the tag again. His brother is a Marine sergeant named James Miller. That's all we have. No city, no state, nothing. We need to find him. The assistant, whose name was Ben, nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the words, Semper Fi. My uncle was a Marine, he said. I don't know if he can help, but I can start calling. I'll use my phone. I'll call every veterans group, every military helpline I can find online. That was the first thread. Aris felt a flicker of gratitude. Thank you, she said, and she meant it. I'm going to call in every favor I have with the medical suppliers. We need different drugs. I think this isn't just a lung thing. The way he's tilting his head, the stumbling. It could be neurological, or it could be a deep, terrible inner ear infection. We need to treat for that. The next few hours were a blur of tense activity. Aris was on the phone with a veterinary pharmacist she knew from college, describing the symptoms in a rushed, technical language. She begged for samples of a stronger, more specific antibiotic and a steroid to reduce inflammation in the brain and ears. Meanwhile, Ben had pulled up a chair in the corner of the staff room, his personal cell phone pressed to his ear. Aris could hear snippets of his conversations as she passed by. "Hello, yes, I'm calling from the city animal shelter. We're trying to locate a Marine. Yes, Sergeant James Miller. We have his dog. I understand it's not a lot to go on. Each time, he was put on hold. Each time, he was transferred. Each time, he hit a wall of privacy laws and polite, helpless apologies. It was like shouting into a giant empty canyon dock by late afternoon. The mood was sinking again. B.O. had been given the new medicine, but he was so weak he couldn't even lift his head to drink. Aris had to syringe water and a liquid nutrient mix into the side of his mouth, drop by careful drop. He swallowed weakly. It wasn't enough, Dot, and then something small but wonderful happened. One of the shelter's regular volunteers, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, came in for her evening shift. She saw the commotion around the isolation kennel and came over. Aris was too tired to explain, so she just handed her the keychain with the tag. The volunteer read it. She didn't say a word for a full minute. She just held the medal, her thumb rubbing over the engraved letters. When she looked up, her eyes were different. They were sharp, focused, and full of a fierce light. "My son is a Marine," she said simply. "He's out now, but his brothers are still in. You don't understand. This," she tapped the tag, "this is a promise. This is one soldier making sure his buddy is taken care of. This isn't a pet. This is family." She pulled out her own phone. "You've been calling the official channels. That's good. Now we call the unofficial ones." She walked away, already dialing. Aris heard her say, "Mike? It's Carol. I need you to reach out to your network. We have a situation." It was the first real break. While Carol worked her contacts, Ben had a different idea. "What about social media?" he asked, "not just us posting. What if we find him? There have to be 1,000 James Millers in the Marines, but maybe." He started searching on a public computer. He looked for a SGT James Miller on every platform he could think of. The problem was, most military people kept their profiles very private, especially when deployed. They found a few, but they were older men, or they lived in towns where someone had already called the local police to check, with no luck. The clock was ticking. Night fell. The shelter grew quiet, except for the sounds of the animals. Aris decided to stay. She made a bed out of blankets next to Beau's kennel. She couldn't leave him. Not tonight. Every hour, she checked his temperature. Every 2 hours, she gave him his medicine. In the dim light, she just sat with him, her hand resting on his side so she could feel him breathe. "It's a big world out there, B.O., she murmured to the sleeping puppy. "And your brother is somewhere in it. But we're here. We're right here. You just have to hang on." She must have dozed off, because the sound of her own phone ringing made her jump. It was after midnight. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, with a strange area code. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She fumbled to answer it. "Hello? Dr. Thorne speaking." The voice on the other end was a man's voice. It was formal, polite, but tired. "Doctor, this is Lieutenant Daniels, with the Public Affairs Office at Camp Lejeune. We received a rather unusual chain of messages about a dog and a Sergeant Miller. Can you confirm you have an animal there with a specific ID tag?" Aris sat bolt upright. This was it. The thread had reached someone. She described the tag, word for word. She described B.O. Dot. There was a long pause on the line. She could hear the rustle of papers. Then the lieutenant's voice came back, and it was softer now. "We have a Sergeant James Miller. He's currently deployed overseas. His contact is restricted, Given the nature of this, we can attempt to relay a message through the Red Cross. It's the only way. It will take some time. A day, maybe 2. Can the dog wait? Aris looked at B.O. His breathing seemed a tiny bit easier. The new medicine might finally be starting to work. She thought of the promise on the tag. He'll come. Yes, she said, her voice firm with a new resolve. Tell him B.O. is waiting. Tell him we are all waiting. The 2 days after the call from the lieutenant felt like walking on a tightrope. There was a fragile hope now, a thin line connecting them to a man somewhere across the world. But beneath that line, B.O. was still fighting his own war, and it was a day-by-day battle. The new medicines had started to work, but slowly. The terrible rattling in Beau's chest began to soften, turning from a sharp crackle to a wet, but easier, sound. The fever broke on the morning of the 2nd day. Aris found him with a cool, damp nose when she checked, and she almost cried with relief. But the head tilt and the stumbling were still there. He would try to stand up to drink. His legs would wobble, and he'd plop down again, looking frustrated and confused. It's the balance, Aris explained to Ben and Carol, who had become her small, dedicated team. It's like he's on a boat that's always rocking. His inner ear, where his balance comes from, is swollen and infected. The medicine will fix it, but his brain has to relearn which way is up. It takes time. Time was the one thing they weren't sure they had. The shelter manager had seen the vet bills piling up. He called Aris into his office, a cramped room full of paperwork. Aris, I admire what you're doing, he said, rubbing his forehead. I do, but we have 40 other animals here who need care. This one dog's bill is more than what we spend on food for a week. What's the plan? What if this Marine brother can't be found? Or what if he's found and he doesn't want the dog back? Aris had thought of this. Every single possibility had played in her head like a bad movie during her long nights next to Beau's kennel. Give me 3 more days, she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She straightened her shoulders. The Red Cross message has been sent. We should hear something soon. And if his brother can't take him, I will find a rescue that can. I'll pay the difference myself if I have to. She didn't know how she'd pay for it, but saying it out loud made it feel possible. The manager sighed, a long, tired sound. 3 days, he agreed. And talk to Carol. She's been on the phone all morning. She might have an idea. Carol's idea was simple and brilliant. She had been calling not just military contacts, but every local business and charity she could think of. She found a small, non-profit pet rescue organization that specialized in taking on hopeless medical cases. When Carol told them the story, not just of a sick dog, but of a tag, a Marine, and a promise, the woman who ran the rescue didn't hesitate. You tell that vet to keep doing her job, the woman said. We'll cover the outstanding bills. Every last cent. A promise like that needs to be kept. When Carol told Aris the news, Aris had to sit down. The weight of the bills, the fear of being the reason the shelter suffered, it just lifted. It was like taking a deep breath for the first time in a week. Now they could fight for B.O. with everything they had. No regrets. The 2nd day turned into the 3rd. The team moved in a rhythm around B.O. Ben handled the social media, posting updates on the shelter's page, not using Beau's real name or the brothers, but talking about a special puppy with a special tag who is getting better. The community response was huge. People donated blankets, toys, and money for future cases. They shared the posts thousands of times, with comments saying, "Find his brother." And Semper Fi. Carol worked the phone lines, a general marshaling her troops. She checked in with her military contacts every few hours, a polite but persistent force. And Arrest tended to B.O. She started doing simple physical therapy with him, holding him steady so he could try to eat from a bowl. She'd support his wobbly body and let him take a few steps on a non-slip mat. He was frustrated, but he was trying. His eyes, once cloudy, were starting to clear. He'd look at Aris, and there was a spark there, a recognition. He'd even thump his tail weakly on the blanket when she came near Dot. It was late in the afternoon on the third day. The shelter was noisy with barking and the sounds of cleaning. Aris was in the isolation room, sitting on the floor with Bio. She had just helped him drink, and he was resting his head on her leg, exhausted from the effort. Her phone, lying on the floor beside her, buzzed. Dot. It was an unknown number. But this one was different. It had a string of extra numbers in front of it, like an international call. Her mouth went dry. She picked it up. Hello? The connection was bad. There was a hollow echo, a delay, and the faint, faraway sound of wind or static. Then a voice, a man's voice, broken by the poor line. Hello? Is this the vet? Is this the doctor? Yes. This is Dr. Thorne, she said, pressing the phone to her ear, trying to block out all the other noise. This is James Miller. The voice cracked on the name. He was shouting slightly, as if from a great distance. They gave me your message. About Bio. Is he? Is he alive? Aris felt a huge lump form in her throat. He's alive, she said, loudly and clearly. He's right here. He's sick, but he's getting better. We found your tag. On the other end of the world, there was a sound. It wasn't a word. It was a harsh, choked gasp, a sob that the man tried to swallow. There was a long silence filled only by the strange, electronic emptiness of the satellite connection. When he spoke again, his voice was thick, raw with emotion. Leo, he managed to say. My little brother Leo. We found Bio together. Just a scrap of a thing in a cardboard box. He was Leo's shadow. Slept on his bed every night. He took a shaky breath. After the accident? After Leo was gone. Bio was all I had left of him. I had to deploy so fast. I trusted a friend to watch him. He said he lost him. I've been going crazy over here, thinking he was just gone. Aris closed her eyes, listening. The story painted itself in her mind. It wasn't just a lost dog anymore. It was a last living piece of a lost brother. The tag. James said, gathering himself. I put that on him the day I left. It was my promise to Leo, that I'd always find him, that I'd always come for him. He needs you, Aris said softly, her hand on Beau's head. He's fighting, but he needs to know you're coming. I am, the voice came back, strong and certain now, the voice of a Marine making a vow. My leave starts in 18 days. I will be there. I will come get my dog. Please don't let him go. Do whatever you need to do. I'll pay for everything. Just keep him safe until I get there. We will, Aris promised. We'll keep him safe. He's not alone anymore. They talked for only a few more minutes, practical details about Beau's treatment, about where the shelter was. The call was cutting in and out, but the important things had been said. The connection was made. When the call dropped, Aris sat in the quiet of the room. Bio stirred, lifting his tilted head to look at her. She realized she was crying, the tears just rolling silently down her cheeks. But they were good tears. She leaned close to the puppy. He's coming, Bio, she whispered, her voice breaking with a smile. Your brother is coming. You just have to get strong. For the first time, Bio let out a small, soft sound. Not a whimper of pain. It was a sigh. It sounded like relief. The phone call changed everything. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Before, they were fighting for a mystery. Now they were fighting for a brother. For James, for Leo, for Bio, the story had a heart. And it beat in 3 different places, in a shelter, in a distant country, and in memory. Knowing James was coming in 18 days gave their work a new energy, but it also added a new kind of pressure. It wasn't just about keeping Bio alive anymore. It was about helping him heal, about getting him ready for a reunion that had to be perfect. Aris felt it most of all. She had spoken to the man. She had heard the crack in his voice. She couldn't let him come home to a puppy that was just barely surviving. The first big challenge was the head tilt. Beau's balance was still a mess. He could eat, but he'd often stumble sideways into his food bowl. He wanted to walk, but the world was a spinning carnival ride for him. Aris did research late into the night. She read about vestibular disease in dogs, about physical therapy techniques. She wasn't a specialist, but she decided to become one. Just for Bio. She started simple. She would sit on the floor of the isolation room, with her legs stretched out in a V. She'd place Bio between them, her legs acting as soft bumpers so he couldn't fall over. Then she'd hold a tiny piece of chicken just in front of his nose. She'd move it slowly up, encouraging him to lift his head. He'd try, his neck muscles trembling with the effort, his head wobbling like a loose wheel. After a few seconds, he'd drop it again, exhausted. But every day, he could hold it for a second longer. "Good boy," Aris would murmur, giving him the chicken. "Such a good, strong boy." Ben, the assistant, took on the job of building an obstacle course. But it wasn't a tough one. He got yoga mats from a donation bin and laid them out for a non-slip surface. He used empty cardboard boxes to make gentle, low walls. The goal wasn't for Bio to jump. It was for him to walk in a straight line, to navigate a gentle turn without falling over. At first, Bio would take 2 steps, tilt, and bump into a box. Ben would be right there to catch him, to steady him, to give him a scratch behind the ears. "You got it, buddy. Try again." Carol, the volunteer, became the morale commander. She brought in a new, fluffy bed for Bio. She made sure he had the quietest, calmest corner of the shelter. And she handled the outside world. News of the story had leaked a little, thanks to her careful hints to the right people. A local newspaper reporter came by. Carol and the shelter manager spoke to him, careful to protect James's privacy until he was home. They talked about the tag, about the promise, about the community of people who had stepped up to help. The story ran with the title, "A Promise on a Tag." Donations for the shelter poured in, but the real work was in the small, quiet moments. Aris noticed Bio would sometimes just stop and stare at the wall, confused by his own skewed vision. She started talking to him constantly. She'd tell him about her day, describe the other animals, read the silly notes on the donation boxes. She wanted him to know a human voice meant safety and comfort. She wanted him to remember that one afternoon, about a week after the call, something magical happened. Aris was doing the head lift exercise. She moved the piece of chicken from his nose up towards her own face. Beau's eyes followed it. His wobbly head came up. And then, for the first time since it arrived, his tail gave a definite, clear thump, thump, thump against the floor mat. Aris froze. She didn't want to scare him. She slowly put the chicken down and just looked at him. Bio looked back, his head cocked in that permanent, curious tilt. Then he did it again. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't just a reflex. It was communication. It was happiness. Tears sprang to Aris's eyes. She called for Ben and Carol. They crowded into the doorway, watching as Aris held up another piece of chicken. Thump, thump, thump. "He's in there," Ben said, a huge grin spreading across his face. The real Bio was coming out. From that day, progress, while still slow, felt more real. The head tilt didn't go away. but it got a little less severe. The stumbling turned into careful, deliberate steps. He learned to drink from a bowl without falling in. He started to play. Not a wild, puppy play, but a gentle one. He would nudge a tennis ball with his nose, then look up at Aris as if to say, "See what I did?" Aris began to let him spend short periods of time in the main office, where he could get used to normal sounds, the phone ringing, the copy machine, people talking. He would lie on his fluffy bed under Carol's desk, watching the world go by, his tail giving an occasional quiet thump dot as the days counted down. A new, anxious thought began to grow in Aris's mind. What would happen when James finally walked in? B.O. had been through so much trauma. He had been lost, terribly sick, and surrounded by strangers. Would he even remember the voice from the phone? Would he remember his brother? She started preparing for that too. She asked James in one of their brief, emailed updates to record a short audio message. A few days later, an email arrived with a file attached. The note simply said, "For B.O." Aris waited until the shelter was quiet. She brought B.O. into the office and sat with him. She pushed play on her phone dot. The voice that came out was clear and calm, softer than it had been on the bad connection. "Hey, B.O., it's me. I'm still far away, but I'm thinking about you every day. I remember when you were so small, you fit in my hand. I remember how you used to steal Leo's socks. I'm coming home to you, buddy. You just be strong. I'll be there soon." B.O. had been chewing on a soft toy. He stopped. His head lifted, ears twitching. He looked around the room, searching for the source of the sound. He looked at the phone in Aris's hand, his head tilting the other way in deep confusion. He let out a small, uncertain whine. Then he walked over to Aris and put his head in her lap, his eyes fixed on the phone as the message played again. He didn't wag his tail. He just listened, perfectly still, as if committing the sound to a memory that had been buried under fever and fear. Aris played the message, for him once a day after that. Each time, B.O. would listen intently. The confusion faded, replaced by a kind of calm recognition. He would sigh afterwards and curl up to sleep. The countdown was now in single digits. B.O. was healthy. Not perfect. He might always have a slight tilt, the vet said, but healthy, strong, and full of a gentle, grateful kind of love. The shelter was spotless, buzzing with a nervous excitement. The promise on the tag was about to be tested. The brother was almost home. All they could do now was wait, hope, and make sure Beau's favorite bed was fluffed and ready. The last day of waiting was the hardest. The air in the shelter felt electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Everyone moved through their chores, but their eyes kept drifting to the front door, to the clock on the wall. The appointment was for 3 o'clock. James had emailed. His flight was on time. He would be there. Aris had spent the morning with B.O., giving him a gentle brush until his brown coat shone. He looked good. He'd put on healthy weight. His eyes were clear and bright, and while his head still sat at that charming, permanent tilt, he walked with a steady confidence. He followed Aris from room to room, his nails clicking on the floor, sensing the change in the rhythm of the day. "Big day, little man," she told him, her voice softer than usual. She felt a complicated knot of emotions in her chest. There was joy, of course, and profound relief. But there was also a sharp, surprising pang of loss. For over 3 weeks, this puppy had been her purpose. His fight had been her fight. Letting go, even for the happiest of reasons, felt like saying goodbye to a piece of herself. She decided to wait with B.O. in the office, not in the clinical isolation room or the noisy kennel area. This was where he felt safe now, on his fluffy bed under the desk. Carol brought in a bowl of fresh water. Ben straightened the framed newspaper article on the wall for the 10th time. They were all there, The small team that had become a family, waiting out at 5 minutes to 3. The front door buzzer sounded. Everyone jumped. Ben went to answer it. Aris knelt down next to Bio. "This is it," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Be brave. He's here." They could hear low voices in the lobby. Then, footsteps coming down the hallway. Ben appeared in the office doorway. His face said everything. His eyes were wide, full of an emotion too big for words. He just nodded and stepped aside, and then he was there. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall and lean, dressed in clean, pressed jeans and a simple green t-shirt. He carried himself with a straight-backed stillness, but his hands were clenched at his sides. His face was younger than Aris had imagined from his voice, but it was etched with a tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. His eyes scanned the room, past the people, searching for only one thing. Aris didn't say a word. She just looked down at Bio had been lying on his bed. At the sound of the new footsteps, he had stood up. He looked at the stranger in the doorway. His nose twitched. His ears, which usually drooped, lifted slightly. The man, James, took a slow, hesitant step into the room. He seemed afraid to speak, afraid to break the spell, and then he did. His voice, when it came, was a cracked whisper, just 2 words. "Hey, Bio." It was the voice from the phone, the voice from the recording. But it was alive. In the room, warm and real. Bo's whole body froze. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. No one breathed. Then, a shudder went through the puppy. It started at his nose and ran all the way to the tip of his tail. A low, uncertain whine escaped his throat. He took one wobbly step forward, then another. He wasn't running. It was a slow, deliberate walk, a journey of 10 feet that felt like a mile. James sank to his knees right there on the office floor, tears already streaking down his face, not even trying to hide them. Bio walked right up to him. He stopped, his tilted head looking up into the man's streaming eyes. He sniffed his hands, his jeans. He took one more, final step and pushed his head into James's chest. That was the moment. A sound broke from James. Half a sob, half a laugh, as his arms came up and wrapped carefully. So carefully around the dog. He buried his face in Bo's fur, his shoulders shaking. Bio responded by squirming closer, licking any part of James's face he could reach, his tail whipping back and forth in a frantic, joyful blur. It wasn't a reunion of wild excitement. It was a reunion of deep, soul-level recognition. A missing piece clicking back into place. Aris, watching from the side, felt her own tears fall freely. Carol was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Ben just grinned, a lump in his throat. For a long time, James just knelt there, holding his dog, whispering things only Bio could hear. Words for a brother gone, words for a friend lost and found. Promises kept. Finally, he looked up, his eyes finding Aris. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He just shook his head, his gratitude too vast for language. Aris walked over and crouched down beside them. Bio immediately turned and gave her hand a lick, as if to say, "See? This is my person." "He remembers you," Aris said softly. "He remembers Leo," James replied, his voice rough. He kept one hand firmly on Bo's side, as if he might vanish. "Thank you. You didn't just save his life. You saved this." He gestured weakly at the dog in his arms, at the moment itself. He stood up, Bio cradled gently against his chest. Bio rested his head on James's shoulder, looking over at the people in the room with calm, contented eyes. The journey was over. There were papers to sign, instructions to go over about Bo's continued medication for his ear. James listened intently, nodding, but his attention was like a string. always tied back to the warm weight in his arms. When it was finally time to leave, the whole shelter staff had gathered quietly in the lobby. James turned to face them. B.O. still held close. "I don't know how to thank you all," he said, his voice strong now, clear. "You saw a promise on a tag, and you fought for it. You fought for him. For me. For my brother." He looked down at B.O., who yawned, exhausted from emotion. "I'll never forget it." He walked out the front door into the afternoon sun. Aris and the others watched from the window. They saw James stop on the sidewalk. He put B.O. down gently on the pavement, holding on to his leash. B.O. stood there for a second, looking up at his brother. Then, with his slightly crooked, determined walk, he trotted alongside James towards a waiting car, his nose busy with 1,000 new smells. His world finally right side up again. Back inside, the office felt very quiet. The fluffy bed was empty. Aris picked it up to put it away, and she smiled through the last of her tears. It was a good ending. The best kind. It wasn't about a dog being rescued by people. It was about people being brought together by a dog, fulfilling a promise that was bigger than all of them. The tag had done its job. Semper Fi, always faithful.